Committee Room 29. Sound. 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 Committee Room 29. Sound.
Departmental briefing on the June monitoring round. The meeting will now be open to the public, and the committee meeting will be recorded and broadcast through Parliament buildings and online. Just to remind everyone in attendance, if you can keep your phones and all devices muted, and no one's permitted to take photographs or record any of the meeting. I have two apologies. I have Diane Dodds, and I think Linda was hoping to be here but has been held up at Placing Board. We have a number of members are planning on joining online, but as of yet we haven't got anyone online. So until we've quorum, we're going to skip on to the first briefing. So I'll give Professor Jones a few minutes to get set up. Very welcome. So, just to introduce you, Professor Ray Jones, Emeritus Professor of Social Work at Kingston University and St George's University of London. Just to remind members, we have about an hour and a half for this session, and we want to obviously get the most out of it. We're very pleased to have Professor Jones with us today. This is a huge priority for our committee in terms of the review and taking that forward. So we're really looking forward to this session today. The briefing will be covered by Hansard, and I would like to invite Professor Jones to make his opening remarks. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you for that. Thank you for your time as well. If I speak for about no more than 10 minutes, is that okay? Okay, so maybe a bit of history in terms of this review, in terms of reminding us all how we came to be here. It goes back to November 2021, which is quite a way back now, when Robin Swan was the Minister. There was a different Permanent Secretary in the Department of Health at that time, a different Chief Social Worker, but between them they decided that there should be a review of children's social care services. And the reason for that decision that they took in November 2021 is that there was a real crisis in children's social care services. The crisis was around workforce, great difficulty in retaining as much as recruiting social workers and others working in children's social care. One of the consequences of that was that there was difficulty keeping up with the workloads coming into children's social care in terms of allocating the work in relation to your gateway teams, your initial assessment teams, your family support teams, and other parts of the children's social care system as well. What that meant was that there were over 4,000 children in Northern Ireland who were seen to have crossed the threshold of needing the involvement of statutory children's services within the 5 health and social care trusts who were waiting for allocation to a social worker, over 4,000 children. And some of those children were waiting with their families for some considerable time. Another concern was that families themselves were not getting the help that they required when life was getting very difficult for them, particularly in the context of increasing poverty. So families were struggling more, and it was difficult to get their help out to them. One of the issues that flowed on from that is that more children were being received into care, especially through the courts in terms of court orders. And since that time, and it's actually got worse, the review itself started in February 2022, and I was appointed as the lead reviewer. I had an advisory panel who assisted me, had a secretariat provided by the Department of Health, and other people, including some of the people behind me now, and organisations, were central in terms of the activities during the review. The review wasn't based on sitting down and having meetings. It was about getting out and meeting with as many people as possible across Northern Ireland who had the experience of children's social care, both in terms of using children's social care services, children, young people and families and other parents and other family members, but also those working in children's social care and those working beside children's social care within the health services, within schools, within the justice system, and right across voluntary and community organisations who play a really important part in what's going on for children and families in Northern Ireland. So over 18 months, I got out and about across the region, found much which was really impressive. You have a lovely country and you have lovely people. And I really much enjoyed my time in Northern Ireland. I was in Northern Ireland usually for about 3 days a week during that period of time. Actually, this was the time still of COVID when the review started, so there was a lot of stuff still happening on Zoom and Teams, etc. EasyJet often failed to fly me at the time because they didn't have the crew, so I hung around at Bristol Airport for long periods of time. So those were the days when the review started. But for 18 months I got out and about, met with thousands of children and young people, families, those working within children's social care and those working beside children's social care. Started off by meeting, for example, the chairs and chief executives of the trust to look at the governance arrangements for children's social care, met with senior people, colleagues working in the Department of Health, but also in other departments, Department for Education, for example, Department for Justice. We had a number of workshops in the autumn of 2022, each attended by 80, 90, 100 people around major themes that were coming up through the review. And the reason for all of this was that this is not my review. If you're going to call it a review in terms of putting somebody's name to it, maybe call it the Swan Review because it was commissioned by Minister Swan when he was the Minister. And at the launch conference of the review a year ago, of the report from the review a year ago down the hill at the Stormont Hotel, Robin Swan spoke at that conference and gave a really strong endorsement to the recommendations in the review, which I'll come on to in a moment. But it's not my review in the sense that it's a Swan Review as much as it is the Jones Review, but also what's in the review report, which you all have copies of, I think. It's not my view. There's nothing in the report which isn't my view, but it's a view that's been shaped by the people that I've met across Northern Ireland over a period of 18 months. People who've got knowledge, experience, wisdom about children's social care services. So the recommendations are pretty solid recommendations because they're informed by the people who know what is going on and know what needs to happen. And one of the key recommendations, as you will know, is that based on a significant concern that children's social care in Northern Ireland is not getting the attention it needs to get. It's lost amidst the really big agendas. You've had it outside today here in terms of junior doctors and their demonstration. Big agendas in terms of what's going on in your 5 health and social care trusts around health. What's happening in hospitals, but also what's happening in pharmacy, in primary care, in ambulance services, A&E waits, elective surgery delays, etc. And within that context, I know from the chairs of the trust, I know from the chief executives of the trust, that it's very difficult for them to give the time and attention that needs to be given, the dedicated time and attention that needs to be given to children's social care within Northern Ireland. And one of my conclusions in terms of coming forward with the recommendations I came forward with, informed by others, is that this is not about individuals, it's not about competence of people in Northern Ireland. Almost without exception, the people I've met with have been really dedicated. They're people who know what needs to be done, but are hampered, hindered from being able to do what they need to do, especially the Directors of Children's Services. My view about the Directors of Children's Services is that they're good people, but they're distracted and disempowered in terms of their roles. They cannot give the leadership they need to be able to give and the attention they need to be able to give to children's social care in Northern Ireland. They spend a lot of time on corporate agendas around health within the trust, and there's a real issue for you to tackle within Northern Ireland, I think, about who has the authority and the accountability to make things happen. Who can pull the levers to make stuff move forward when it needs to move forward? And that's about the relationships, to some extent, between those operationally providing the services on the ground and the Department of Health. There's a lot of activity, but not enough action. The major recommendation in the review is that you need to reset the platform. You really need a transformational change. You really need to deal with the systemic and the endemic issues. Systemic in the sense they're right across Northern Ireland. It's not within one area, one trust, whatever. It's right across the region. Systemic. It's embedded in your system. A major difficulty in terms of children's social care is lost and not getting the attention it requires. And it's endemic because it's not recent. It's not post-COVID or whatever. This has been going on for years. And indeed, as I say, the review itself was initially being commissioned in November 2021. But the issues that were there then around difficulties in terms of the workforce, difficulties in handling the workflow, difficulties in getting help out to children and families, were all issues that have been around for quite a while. They remain today. So the big recommendation in the review is change the platform, tackle the systemic issue. And the systemic issue is you need that dedicated, focused attention to get a grip on what's happening in your children's social care services, with the leaders empowered to take the decisions they need to take, and with that distraction of being gobbled up with the busyness of the health and social care trusts around health service issues. That in its own right, a children's ALB, region-wide children's social care service, is not in its own right the answer, but it provides you with a platform to generate what then needs to take place in terms of answering some of the big questions around. Stabilising your workforce with a focus on retention, even more than recruitment, to be honest. Tackling the difficulties in getting the help out to families that they need to be given. When at the moment we've become somewhat skewed in our work, focused on child protection. We're drawing more and more children into the care system because we're not providing the help that we want to be able to provide to children and families. That's not a position anybody wants to be in, but that's a position which you have for some time and which is escalating. And since the review started in February 2022, and since the review reported a year ago in June 2024, it's got worse. If you go back to when the review started, there are now 400 more children in care in Northern Ireland than there were when the review started. It's over an 11% increase, over a 10%, 11% increase. 400 more children in care. That's not without its consequence. The consequence is increasingly difficult to find the placements, foster care, residential care placements that those children and young people need. The situation in terms of the workforce has certainly not improved, and in some ways has got worse. When I arrived, there were major issues in terms of recruiting to gateway teams and retaining staff in gateway teams, those initial assessment teams, major difficulties in recruiting and retaining social workers and others in the family support teams. What was not an issue when I arrived was issues about the workforce in the looked after children's teams, but now you have significant difficulties in retaining the workforce within your looked after children's teams despite a 400 young people increase in the number of children in care. So you now have you do have 4,000 children in care. You've reached in Northern Ireland your 4-minute mile moment of suddenly having that increase up to 4,000 children in care. If you compare it across the rest of the UK, the rate of increase of children in care is greater than elsewhere. You have a higher number of children on the Child Protection Register. You have difficulties as elsewhere in the UK in terms of recruiting and retaining the workforce, but that's been getting worse for you in some areas of service. And I have a great anxiety, and that anxiety, I have to say, is generating some anger for me, that this is fixable, this is sortable, you can get your hands around it. People in Northern Ireland tell me, you're not that big, you're not that large. You're big enough to actually be able to sort this, but you're not too large to be overwhelmed by it. You can do this. You really can fix and sort this. But it needs political decision. And that's been really difficult in terms of the review, having political engagement, because for all the life of the review, from February 2022 until June 2023, there was no assembly for me to engage with. So one of my concerns, one of my fears now is that there are people who have not been on the journey with the review and are not seeing the priority that needs to be given to it, are not briefed about the big issues, having to learn it from scratch. And you don't have time to do that. There's an urgency with it. There's colleagues behind me today, I know, from the voluntary and community sector. There's young people here today. And in relation to both the voluntary and community sector, it's got worse for them in terms of reductions in funding. And for young people using voluntary and community services as well as statutory services, it's got more difficult as well. So that's my pitch to you, that you're not where you need to be, but it is sortable. You can get a grip on this, but you have to take some decisions.
Thank you, Professor Jones. I think that has been really excellent, and it has encapsulated where we are and where we need to go. I suppose as a whole system, in terms of our health and social care system, we are talking about the need for transformation, but we also need to make sure that that focus includes children's services, because as you've said, we're long past the time for that to happen, and we need to see the implementation now. A huge amount of work has gone into this, and everyone that has been a part of that have said very clearly we need to see change, and have given us the tools to do that. So we need to make sure that that's prioritised, and certainly for this committee, that is a priority for us. We've been engaging quite extensively with the department to ensure that we can monitor and track the progress, and we're due to get another briefing in a couple of weeks, as I have said to you, because we do recognise the huge importance. We've only one chance at this, and something that really struck me in one of the briefings we've already had was some of the young people involved said that it's too late for them, but we have to make sure that we do that for those coming behind them. And some of the figures you've outlined there in terms of 4,000 children now in care, who I have no doubt that could have been avoided if we had have got the right supports in place at the right time, and that's critical to this. So certainly as a committee, I know that I and colleagues here recognise that, and we want to see this progressing as quickly as possible, because it needs to happen as issues are getting continually worse. You touched on, and I suppose from even when you were carrying out the work of the review, the vacancy rates in children's social work teams, and that has become now even more critical than it was probably at that time. And you are aware of the strikes and things that have been happening, and that is around more terms of safe staffing issues than anything else. And we've been engaged, and we've met with union representatives, and we've a meeting as a committee with some of the union reps next week in relation to that. I suppose I would like to get a wee bit of feedback from you on what, I mean, you've said there very clearly this is fixable, and it's doable, and I think that's the kind of thing we want to make sure that message is heard. What do you think a fix for the vacancy rates and for tackling those issues would look like? I mean, I suppose we want to ensure we're improving working conditions and the staffing levels that we're seeing, because essentially the numbers of the increase of children going into care impact because they're not being seen at that earliest point. We talked about early intervention and family support, and that has to be the starting point. But for a lot of children, by the time they're seen by anybody, it's long past that stage. So just to get some feedback around that.
Yeah. What I would be doing if I was empowered to make things happen in Northern Ireland, and sometimes I can't work out who is empowered to make things happen in Northern Ireland, but what I would be doing is concentrating on retention. We spend a lot of time on recruitment. We are going to be celebrating, and quite rightly so, that there's quite a large number, 200 plus, social workers about to qualify from your universities in Northern Ireland. They are great people. I've met with many of them. I've been at your universities. I've seen the staff who are educating and training them. I've met newly qualifying social workers out in the field. They are good people. You're not short of good people. But what's happening is that a year in, 18 months in, 2 years in, they're exhausted. They don't think this is a safe job to be doing, and they're getting out. So the first thing that you ought to be doing, that I would be doing, is concentrating on retention, not on recruitment. You keep, at the moment, each year, being quite happy that you're recruiting another 100, maybe 120 or whatever, social workers into your children and family services. But you're not giving attention to the attention that's necessary to retention. So you have an inexperienced workforce, increasingly experienced workforce that's churning and changing over very quickly, which is not good for a relationship-based profession like social work, where you need to get to know children and families, know their history, build up trust with them, etc. So it's not good for children and families. So hit retention, that was a big theme within the review report and its recommendations. What that means, in terms of being really practical, is recognising that you don't want to put limits on career progression for social workers. Those who stick with the job and are seen as competent to do it don't have a numbers restriction in terms of the grading, that they're held back from being able to reach the top of the grade, because you have a numbers embargo on who's allowed to reach the top of the grade. Open that up for all the people who are competent and who you want to stay in the business, in the job. The second bit is recognise that you have particular attrition at years 2 and 3 post-qualifying. So reward people for staying, give them a retention payment at that point in time, and allow them to keep that as they progress in their career. The third bit is look at your grading for your frontline managers, because at the moment they're graded at the same level as your highest graded practitioners, but they take on additional responsibilities. They ought to be graded a little bit higher than the practitioners who they are managing. We don't have that in Northern Ireland. So there's a number of issues around retention that ought to be able to be tackled now. They don't cost loads of dosh, loads of money. It just requires the will, but also the clarity about who can take the decision to do it. And you don't have that at the moment. So that's my big issue around workforce, but I've got one other angle on workforce, skills mix. Sometimes you have social workers doing work that you don't have to have qualified social workers doing. There's been some progress, because I've been pushing hard on this over 2 years now, in terms of skills mix. Family support workers, contact workers, etc., social work assistants within your teams. But in the past that's been skewed. All the tasks have been largely reserved for qualified social workers, but you have qualified social workers being asked to do the work that you don't need their skill set for. In residential children's homes, for example, why not have more youth workers, more people who've got experience in teaching, more retired police officers who've got a commitment to young people working in your children's homes, and people who work in the voluntary and community sector with experience of working with young people. Open up that employment opportunity for them. You've done it a little bit, but you ought to do this much more. So retention and skills mix are 2 workforce issues that you ought to be able to tackle.
Thank you. I think that they're all very, very important points, and I think it ties in with probably a lot of what we've been talking about across the board, and retention has to be the key. I mean, I think something that has come across to me very strongly, and coming from social work myself, when newly qualified social workers come out in their AYE year and they're being going into situations where they should have a protected caseload, and often that's just not possible. So by the time they finish their AYE, they're saying, I need out of here, which is really sad, because there's so much potential there, even for their development and what they can bring to and it is particularly children and family services, you know.
And one more comment I might make is on workforce. Sometimes you create too many opportunities for people not to be working in the core services that need to be staffed. So there's exciting developments around the side that, to be honest, are less pressurised, take less responsibility, and you create those posts. And why would you not, if you're in a pressurised job and feeling a bit worn down, apply to those jobs? So things like the multi-disciplinary teams within primary care, good development, especially for adults and older people with long-term conditions, but it's not where you want to put your social workers in terms of children and families. If they're going to have a link, you want it primarily with schools and with your early years services, not based in primary care. But that gives an opportunity for people who are experienced to work separately from the children's social care services in other services. That actually generates more work because those people identify the need, but they're not allowed to meet it because they don't carry the responsibility for children in need, child protection, looked after children. They become a referral source into your statutory services, which have been depleted. So just be careful of the opportunities you create for people to actually move out of the core job of children's social care services into some of the exciting things around them, which aren't quite so stressful.
No, absolutely, and I suppose ideally we'd like to see that all areas of social work, I suppose particularly, are seen as attractive, and that has to happen around children's services as well. I suppose just moving on then to the ALB proposal, and I would like to kind of get some more information on what your thinking is around that. I mean, we've seen examples of that elsewhere, and I suppose it was just to get a wee sense from yourself about what best practice in other areas where maybe there is a similar model, or just to compare to what actually looks good, and maybe where it's not really good practice that we should be learning from as well in relation to that.
Well, the recommendation hasn't come up from experience elsewhere.
Okay.
The recommendation has been thinking really hard about what's best for Northern Ireland and taking advice from people in Northern Ireland about what they think would make most sense as well. And I know from the consultation that went from September until the end of November last year that there was considerable support for the ALB proposal from those who are closest to the issues in relation to what's happening for children and families in Northern Ireland. Some of those are maybe a bit more distant from it, maybe don't feel that change was necessary. Change is absolutely necessary. And the reason that it makes sense for Northern Ireland, is twofold. First of all, consistency. At the moment, you have children's social care services delivered by five health and social care trusts. Those trusts aren't giving the attention, can't give the attention to children's social care they need to give, but they all do it slightly differently. So you will get a different arrangement in one trust compared to another. That came through very clearly from young people when they were talking together about, that's in your area, or we don't have that in my area. So I think you could get greater consistency. But the one thing that you could get from this is greater grip. Because if you had one children's social care organisation for Northern Ireland with one board, one chief executive, albeit delivered locally, and I would still have 5 directors of children's services, but working within one organisation with one culture, with one, if you like, policy setting in terms of how we do things in Northern Ireland. And with those people, day by day, night by night sometimes, thinking about what's happening in children's social care services, you will have more grip. So that's another reason for having it that I think is really important. But something else I would then say, you do have to adjust the relationship between that ALB, anybody providing services on the ground, and the Department of Health. At the moment, there's confusion about governance, there's confusion about authority, there's confusion about accountability, there's also confusion about who is allowed to take decisions and make things happen. And my view, and I was for 14 years a Director of Social Services, is that if I'm doing the job, you have to let me take the decisions to get things sorted. Not have to go to you for permission to do it. You need to be able to do that in Northern Ireland as well.
Okay, so I suppose that leads into my next question around accountability and the mechanisms that you foresee, because that's the key bit that we want to see. And you've alluded to it yourself in terms of decision-making powers, because someone has to take those decisions. If we really want to see change, we need to see that. What do you look at? How do you think what does that look like in terms of the mechanisms then for accountability to ensure that this is watertight?
Yeah. Well, what you want is politicians who set the framework in terms of the legislation, and you have that in terms of the children order, which is a good order. Yeah, you don't need to change the fundamental legislation. It's an order that actually isn't alive and well. It's not being implemented, but it's a good order, the children order. So you want to set the framework in terms of legislation and break the resources for it as well. But you'll come on to resources probably this afternoon. I'm happy to respond about that as well. Then you want the policy to be defined by colleagues in the Department of Health. Then you want to have the operational delivery led by people who can actually do it on the ground without having to go back to get permission from other people in terms of what they can do and what they can't do. So you want to clarify what the role of the Department of Health is. It's setting policy. It's keeping an eye on what's happening. And if, to be honest, the ALB with its chair and its board and its chief executive are not delivering on what needs to be delivered, and you think this is really serious when they report back to you as politicians, then you remove those people and you replace them. But you don't have them operating with their hands behind their back, having to go to others to get permission to do what they need to do operationally across Northern Ireland.
Yeah, and I suppose just on the funding and the resource element of it, and you've alluded to as well with the people working on the ground. I mean, I'm very passionate about this, you'll not be surprised, but I mean the role of the community voluntary sector here is, particularly in children's services, is huge, and you're in my own constituency speaking to some of the really excellent organisations we have working on the ground who are doing all the things that the statutory sector simply cannot do. And as I've said before, it's not a criticism, it's a reality. And they're so agile, and they adapt to the needs of the community because they know the needs of the community so well. They know the needs of the families that are living in their areas, because there's no two places across the north that are the same. And we all have very different socio-economic factors and things like that that determine, I suppose, our life pathways. So in terms of that partnership working as well, do you think it's better to have that a wee bit more formalised so that they're given their equal place in terms of delivering the services rather than being left on? I suppose I'm talking around the funding piece as well. As you'll know, it's particularly for the community voluntary sector, funding is a huge issue. So trying to operate and provide services on a year-on-year basis, trying to access funding can be very, very challenging.
I don't know that you want to formalise it. You don't want to make it rigid.
Give them, I suppose, treating them as an equal
but
partner.
What I'd want to do is change the culture.
Yeah.
Understand what we should be doing together. It should be much more about partnership. At the moment, what you have is a statutory purchasing relationship and contracting relationship with the voluntary and community sector. And the voluntary and community sector often are in competition with each other, having to bid for money that the Department of Health makes available. What do you want is a partnership arrangement, see each other as allies in this together, sit down and have the conversations and shaping agendas together. Not that this is going to happen, you can bid for some money to do it. And it's often short-term funding, so it's wasted. You spend hours sending days, weeks, setting services up, then you start closing them down again fairly soon. There's the uncertainty of one-year budgeting. You need to have agreements then that last for 3, ideally 5 years, so you can get some return on your investment rather than the churn and change we see at the moment. And what you want in terms of leadership is that dedicated leadership that has the time within a children's ALB to be out there within communities, with their partners within the voluntary sector and within education and within health and within policing, etc., and within housing. But as strategic leaders, that chief executive and the 5 directors of children's services across Northern Ireland, not being gobbled up with stuff about the health agenda, but there for children and families out there in their communities. If you do that, you actually change the culture, the understanding of what the role is, and we need to do that.
Oh, absolutely. My last question, because I'm conscious others will have a lot of questions too. In terms of the ALB then, are there any risks that you anticipate with setting up an ALB? And you mentioned then around the role of the department in keeping an eye on things. Just a wee bit more information around how you kind of see that relationship. Is it an oversight role or what do you...
The danger with the ALB is you set up a new organisation and you don't change anything.
Yeah.
And everybody thinks we're going to go on as we were before. The whole point of having an ALB is to do it differently, to provide the platform to allow it to be done differently, to allow the people who are leading within the ALB to get on and do the job, working in partnership with others, staying close to their front line, rather than being distracted by lots of other agendas and busyness that's around at the moment. And the bit about the department is informing you as politicians, the Minister, in terms of how well it's going. So keeping an eye on it, but not what you have at the moment, which is monthly reporting and monthly meetings. But annual reviews, etc. Being close enough to what's happening to spot where things aren't going well, but not taking up the time that the department takes up at the moment of leaders within children's social care across the 5 trusts, of monthly reports, monthly meetings, etc. So the danger with an ALB is nothing changes. But the ALB gives you the platform to make the change that you need to make.
Okay, thank you. I have Orlia.
Yes, thank you so much, Ray. And I suppose what struck me when you made your opening remarks was your comments around, and you could see it as you were speaking, that almost that it's that sense of anger, that, and obviously that's coming from a good place because you've spent the time speaking to the thousands of families and kids and and brilliant social workers and all the rest, all the good people. So that's where the anger is coming from, and it's coming from a place of obviously passion and that you care about the people that you met. And I am just keen to know, you were also clear in saying, so number one, the situation is clearly still getting worse. It's heading in the wrong direction, but it is fixable.
Yep.
But there is an urgency
Yep.
as to how we actually now go about fixing it. So as the chair had says, this health committee has made this issue a priority, and that's got the cross-party agreement in terms of our health committee. But now it's how do we actually try and put some of this into action in terms of us as a committee lobbying with the Minister of Health, and then if the Minister of Health needs to bring anything forward to the executive or whatever needs to happen, it's how then we can start to put some of this into motion, hopefully. Yeah. So when you had spoke about one of the key priorities around retaining, and I understand that you have to retain, because we had the briefing the other week, and we're hearing about the new students are coming in, they're insanely under pressure and then they're leaving, so it's a bit of a waste. So in terms of the ALB, would that structure and body need to be set up first and foremost? So you're starting off, as you said, with a clean slate and the new system, and then that they take it on in terms of making retention a priority, or what would come first there?
Well, what I suggested over a year ago now was get on with it. I did wake up in the middle of the night last night thinking about meeting with you, and suddenly I thought, hey, there's a lot of long grass in Northern Ireland, a lot of sand. So much gets kicked into the long grass, so much sifting goes into the sand. One of the fears of colleagues behind me, young people in Northern Ireland, is this is going to be another review which has taken a lot of time. It's cost over £1 million if you add it all together, with the consultation, etc. Is anything going to happen? Well, we've lost a year already, and we have a new minister who's not been on this journey, so it's very difficult for that minister to get his head around it, I would think. So what I proposed a year ago was bite the bullet, take a decision, get it started, appoint a shadow board, appoint a designate chief executive, allow them to start setting up the ALB and expect to be in a position where it's in place within 2 years. If that was started a year ago, we'd be 12 months into this now. Allow them, with the current directors of children's services within the trust, to start shaping what's going to happen and taking some of those decisions around, for example, retention. Allow them to be getting on with it. So you're doing 2 things at the same time. You're creating the new organisation, but you're hitting those issues that need to be hit now by the people who are going to be leading that organisation in the future. We've lost a year already. It's got worse during the last year. And I see nothing at the moment in the future which suggests that this is going to move at pace. And the other thing about Northern Ireland, you have lots of walls. And to be honest, I've got to the stage now banging my head against the wall, and all I'm getting is a headache and nothing is happening.
Yeah, no, well look, I think that we understand that, because one of the other priorities that we identified at our planning session a number of weeks ago was around, as a committee, we also feel frustrated it's wider than children's services, but when you look at, reviews and reports and inquiries, and I think that was one of the things that we all sort of felt, it's like, but how can we see the change? Do you know what I mean? Like, how can we track the change, and who's following the progress of the change, and is there any change? So it's good that you've highlighted all those points to us today, and hopefully we can help with this process with the health minister. But then just finally, so in terms of, as you say it, Ray, then, so next steps could potentially and should be appoint the shadow board and the CEO, and then let that work.
And they did the creation of the new organisation. They start shaping the agenda. They work with the Director of Children's Services, who will be incorporated into the new organisation, so that together they are making this happen. And where they can, they start doing things now that they know they're going to live with in the future.
So 2 questions on that then. My first one is, you had mentioned earlier that there's not a huge cost in terms of fixing this huge problem. So even if you were to go through the process of appointing a board and a CEO and getting some of that work underway, would there be a sort of a cost set to that? And then, because I'm thinking if we're making the lobby to the Minister, we have to be specific and as much as we can. So the number one thing is the cost in practical terms, and then the second thing was, conscious that we'll have a new health minister in place, but with Robin Swan, or did you ever have any commitment, any good soundings that the department would follow through on this ALB?
Well, going back to Robin, and Robin was engaged throughout the review until October of last year when he had to stand down, and then didn't have that role, but came to the launch conference, and as I was saying earlier, made a really clear statement from himself that he thought that what was being proposed in the review, including the ALB, was necessary and needed to be moved forward at pace. There had to be a public consultation. The Department of Health really impressively ran that consultation very well from September through until the beginning of December. But here we are now in June. One of the things I suggest you might want to do in terms of decision, or if you like, actions that you could take, is to ask for the outcome of that consultation. It's available, and the analysis has been done. It's not been published. It's sitting there. We are now 7 months on from that consultation having finished. So the first thing you could ask for is a review, the report of the consultation being published, and for you to have it so that you can see it. Second point from me is that in terms of the cost, I have no idea how much money is spent on children's social care in Northern Ireland. You don't either. No one could tell me during the review. Hey, if you're managing a service, leading a service, me as a Director of Social Services for 14 years, if I didn't know what money I had, what money I could spend, have the authority and the power to move it around, sometimes to go at risk, spend a bit more than I've got because I know that over 18 months I can claim that back in terms of the savings I'll make. That's what you do when you're managing the money. We're not managing the money. We're spending the money. We're not managing it. And in terms of how much would it cost, yeah, there's some cost, but you get some savings back remarkably quickly because you are wasting money in Northern Ireland at the moment. And if you want to ask me for some examples, I'm very happy to give them. But you have opportunities to save money. You need some more money for children's social care because while you have increasing poverty in Northern Ireland, you're increasing demand as well. Tackle the poverty issue. Get rid of the child benefit cap as a priority. That will stop some of the families getting the difficulty they're getting into now. But you can save money through this process and save money, use it better than you're using it at the moment. So this is not, if you like, a high cost demand in terms of spend. My view in the report is that we're talking about hundreds of thousands of pounds, not millions of thousands of pounds. And it's short term. It's transition money to put in place the new organisation. So this is money you can afford to spend and you ought to spend.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Ray.
Nuala.
Thank you so much, Ray, for coming here today. I am only new to the Health Committee, but I actually sit on the Policing Board's Performance Committee as well, and we regularly have a lot of contact with with the police who are in contact with social services, and they are always negative reasons, but not to the fault of any, of the young people involved. It's because the police feel that they're being relied upon too much. So whilst it is somewhat new to me, it's not entirely, and it's an issue that I am very much across the detail on because I want to see change on it. I represent North Belfast, and in one of the wards of the Waterworks, 1 in 20 children are children who are in care, and I think that's such a stark figure. That's a child in every single classroom in a school, and at the end of the day it is a child, it's a person, and they have a whole future ahead of them, and so it's so important, and I'm so thankful for you to ensure that all of those children actually had a say in what it should look like, and the chair is right that it might have been too late for them, but actually for the others that come before them, and whilst this new minister might be new, you know, he should know that this review is actually so important, and he has made a commitment that social care, I believe he said, was a priority for him, and this also comes under that too, so we will be holding the department to that. Unfortunately, we have had the department in twice now to the committee, where we have been able to ask them questions with regards to the recommendations and where they are. It's not, from my point of view, I know that they're sure the same, it's not been great, to be perfectly honest, and there's been a lot of talk about work streams being set up to review the review, rather than actually just get to work to implement it. So a lot of our questions always remain for the department rather than yourself, because we're not going to disagree in a lot of things. So some of the questions that I have are just around kind of expanding on some of the issues. And I'm glad that you kind of spoke a little bit about the relationships between the arm's length body and the department, because that was one of them. I wanted to speak a little bit about children's homes and smaller children's homes, and I have met with loads of organisations. One of them include youth, who speak a little bit about these smaller children's homes, and we have also, when we met with the BASWA, they have highlighted the cost between running a children's homes versus foster care, and there's immediate savings when you do things differently, and the cost of the smaller children's homes versus everything that's associated with the bigger ones. So I just wanted to see if you could actually expand a little bit on why you believe that those smaller children homes are beneficial.
Right. I think foster care is a really valuable service. To be honest, it's the core service for children in care in terms of numbers. You have a high rate of kinship foster care in Northern Ireland as well, which generally is very positive. But I do have a fear, with increasing numbers of children coming in care, you may be, if you like, forcing kinship care placements because you have no alternative, when it might actually not be in the best interest of the child, but there's nowhere else for the child to go. But you have really good kinship care generally in Northern Ireland. You have really good foster care generally in Northern Ireland, although the foster carers have been waiting for the strategic review of foster care of 2012 still to be implemented 12 years ago, around fee levels and things like that there. So you're having more difficulty, it seems to me, in recruiting foster carers. Children's home are a very valuable resource. They're not a last option. For some children, a children's home is the right place for them to be. But your children's homes in Northern Ireland, I spent an evening, whenever I was out in a trust area for 2 days in a row, I spent the evening in a children's home. Just being there with the young people, having tea together, absorbing it, sometimes watching the challenges and the confrontation going on, and sometimes having good conversations. It varied from time to time in terms of how things were. So why do I think you would do with having some smaller children's homes? And I suggest you need to move at this at pace as well. Firstly, you have some children who, because of maybe neurological disability or whatever, neurodisability, actually can't cope with the stimulus of lots of activity around them. And what you do at the moment is you send them down south, or you send them over the water in terms of placements to small children's homes there, sometimes in private children's homes. That's not good for them. They're taken miles away from their families, from their communities, and out of sight of their social workers. Keep it in Northern Ireland. I'm only talking here about 2, 3, 4 small 2-3 bedded children's homes, and I'm already beginning to recognise what the consequence is of not doing it. The private sector is moving now into Northern Ireland and setting these homes up, and you are beginning to buy these placements from the private sector. Once that door is open, it's a real strength in Northern Ireland. You don't have big private sector involvement in your children's services taking loads of money out as profit. That's really good in Northern Ireland. Hold on to it. But you're going to find that door being pushed ajar by the private sector opening the children's homes that's necessary in Northern Ireland, because no one is taking the decision yet again to do it for yourselves.
Well, thank you for that, and I was aware about the private aspect of it, and think it's important that is highlighted today, that it is about cost effectiveness as well. That could be like an added bonus on to the department whenever they do talk about the cost at all times. I also wanted to ask you, in the report, you focus on respite care a little, well, not a little, but and one of the recommendations that you have highlighted is that those children who are in respite care should not be seen as looked after children. As I understand it, it's 3 months and then that comes in automatically. I wonder if you might expand on that a little, but also would that dilute the obligations? Not that they're actually meeting them, not that the trusts or the department's meeting them at the minute, but would that dilute the obligations of statutory services?
Two things about respite care for children, and for any child really, but especially for children with a disability. I met with parents of children with disability, I met with disabled young people. The service deteriorated greatly during COVID. It wasn't available for a lot of families during COVID for two reasons. The respite care homes were used for longer term care for children and young people with disability who couldn't remain with their families at that time, but also delivering any type of temporary care outside the family home when the restrictions on contact and infection control, etc., was more difficult. I don't know what the position is now in June 2024, but in June 2023, when the report was published in terms of the review, you had not regained the position in relation to respite care for children in Northern Ireland. You need to reclaim that position. That's the first comment. The second bit in terms of the status of children who and families who are receiving respite care. On many occasions, I was told by families, parents, they were very reluctant to use respite care because it meant that they had to allow their child to be in care, and they saw that was then threatening and challenging for them, that suddenly their child was not in their care, it was in care, and the state, the Health and Social Care Trust, took on a parental responsibility for those children. So respite care for them was not something that they eagerly looked towards. They needed the help of respite care. The children might benefit, the young people might benefit from that time with a bit of independence away from their families as well. But the families were very concerned that this was disempowering. They felt it was a bit stigmatising. They were frightened and threatened by it. So, it's not a good idea. And I think there's been some discussion and debate about whether it actually is a requirement in Northern Ireland that children within respite care are seen as and treated as looked after children. But there's a cost to this. If you receive a child into care, there's a whole bureaucracy and proceduralisation that kicks in. And that takes up time. It costs money. So you can actually make some savings on this, do a better job for children and families at the same time.
Well, thank you. That's actually quite helpful. So it is, because I know it is a much wider issue on the respite, but it's important that those children are also have a voice here today. I also wanted to ask then, I'm going to focus a little bit on the kind of aspect of that interaction between the social care services and the police. And do you believe that the police should there's an over-reliance on kind of contacting and involving the police when it comes to young people in care, or are police kind of called too often? You know, what's your... It's
a really thorny issue. It's a really thorny issue.
Yeah.
And I don't have a definitive answer on this. I've been involved in this stuff for 50 odd years, and sometimes you actually need the support of another agency to come in because it's really challenging and really threatening. And you need the powers of the police sometimes to contain and control what needs to happen. But if you had a more secure staff group yourself, you probably don't have as much escalation in terms of children's behaviour. So get onto the retention issue again, we can actually strengthen our services. I do think there are times, and this is one area where you can make big savings in relation, and I met with the police several times. When I say the police, senior officers in relation to child protection and public protection, but also officers on the ground in Northern Ireland, and I had really good engagement from them with me, and I was very pleased to have that contact. But one of the things, for example, that you have, thinking about justice and the police, is that you have Woodlands as the Secure Juvenile Justice Centre in Northern Ireland. I'm sure you know about Woodlands. It's 48 places. It is pretty well state-of-the-art in terms of its facilities. I've been to Woodlands 7 or 8 times now. Yeah, it's impressive. It's massively underused. It's a 48-bed facility, and you have at any one time, I don't know, 6, 8, 9, 10 young people within it. That number? It's 4 at the moment. That is criminal for 2 reasons. A, you're wasting money, and you need the money. but B, you've got a resource there that ought to be available for the children who need it. Around the corner, you have Lakewood, the secure children's home, which is under tremendous pressure in terms of the demand for placements for children in need for a different number of reasons, young people, to be in security at that point in time. Security not in terms of being locked up, but being cared for, contained, because they're at risk to themselves often, as much as to anybody else. And this is not rocket science, and it's not recent. In 2018, you had a review of the regional facilities for children and young people, looked at Lakewood, looked at Woodlands, made recommendations. Here we are, and I've made recommendations a year ago, but I started the conversation with the Minister for Justice and the Minister of Health way back in October 2022. And Naomi and Robin were both in agreement that we ought to be able to move together Lakewood and Woodlands, but with a new service at Woodlands as a secure children's home, including the criminal justice, juvenile justice element being available through it as well. Nothing has happened. This goes back to the ALB, because I understand from colleagues in justice that there would be reluctance, and I share that reluctance, of bringing Lakewood and Woodlands into one service if it was then to be managed by one health and social care trust, who would not necessarily have give it the attention and the time, and maybe not even have the expertise that it required. At different times in my career, I've had responsibility for 2 secure services, 2 secure units for children. They need close watching, close monitoring, and a lot of support and assistance. They are doing a really difficult job. So you wouldn't want to push that into one health and social care trust to do it, because to be honest, you probably lose a bit of being on top of what's happening. Within a Children and Families ALB, you ought to have the expertise and the capacity to give that the attention that needs to be given. You can then achieve 3 things. Better use of Woodlands. Reduce the demand in terms of Lakewood. Indeed, you would then free up Lakewood to retain in Northern Ireland young people at the moment who you are sending off to other areas of the UK and down to the Republic, because you cannot provide the service for them in Northern Ireland. You could actually reposition, repattern, reuse Lakewood to stop children being sent outside of Northern Ireland, and you would make better use of Woodlands in terms of that resource, and it is a very good resource.
Thank you for that. There are concerns that are maybe they differ in the kind of stakeholder community around the shared campus, though and in particular, whenever you use the word justice, and it's important to recognise that there are differences, and that and my party's belief is that criminal age of responsibility is it's far too low here in Northern Ireland, but how do we square the circle of the justice element and the kind of the children in secure accommodation, and also how do we square the circle of something that has been run well by one department at times, if another department takes it over, i.e. health, does it just end up like Lakewood in the end?
Yeah, don't have health taking it over.
Yeah.
Don't merge Woodland and Lakewood and then give the responsibility to one of the health and social care trusts who would not have the time and capacity, or maybe the expertise, to give it the attention that's required. Justice have done a good job with Woodlands, apart from it's wasting a load of money. It's underused. Don't start filling it up by through the courts sending loads of people into Woodlands. Woodlands is not only underused, sometimes it's been inappropriately used. During the time that I was here doing the review, there was only one person in Woodlands who was there as a consequence of a sentence. All the rest were remanded or were PACE admissions by the police, short-term admissions until they got their first court appearance. So be careful about suddenly thinking, well, let's try and fill Woodlands up. What we want to do is to make the best use of Woodlands. And this bit about justice compared to childcare. How do you square that circle? You're talking about children and young people. You're often talking about the same children and young people. I've met many of them who've been in Lakewood and in Woodlands. Some of them also have been in Beechcroft. They've run around the circle. They're similar young people. Not all of them are the same, but they're similar young people. You stigmatise at the moment young people by going into Woodlands, by seeing them as criminals. Have it as a secure children's home, admit on the basis of need in terms of what they require, Some of that might be required in terms of security for their own safety or the safety of the public. But they're children and young people first. Run it as a children and young people service. Have it less stigmatising than it is at the moment. Make better use of it. But create the organisational platform, an ALB, which allows that to happen. You're wasting loads of money at the moment.
So you think so? It'll be under the ALB. That's.
I think that's a prerequisite, because you won't want
Yeah.
to put it into Belfast Trust or Southern Trust or whatever, and I don't think that would be persuasive for the Justice colleagues, and it wouldn't be persuasive for me.
Like, thank you. I could ask like loads of questions now, but I understand that others want it.
Oh, no problem. Thank you, Neela. Danny?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you very much, Ray, for that presentation today. I absolutely get your passion to deliver improvement in this area, and thanks very much for your report and the recommendations. I get your frustration today, and I feel your anger that nothing has changed and there has been inaction, and actually the situation has got worse. And I absolutely get that, and it is an indictment of this place and politicians in this place that our government goes up and down, and that we don't address things, and the situation is getting worse when it was a crisis to start with. So I absolutely get that. I want to go back just to something you were talking about at a very early stage about the importance of retention. My background's in nursing, and we have a very, very similar problem within nursing, that we do have nurses who are leaving before their career is over, and you have experienced nurses who have years of experience and then leaving the profession when they had years and years of their career to go, and losing that experience is to a huge detriment to the service, and absolutely cannot be replaced. It's not like for like when you have newly qualified nurses who just have their degree behind them but don't have that experience. Absolutely not like for like at all. So losing those people is hugely damaging. I'm just wondering, if we have had so much retention, if we have had so many people leaving, there's a body of professionals there who wanted to work in this service and have left for whatever reason. How do you think we can entice those people back? Is there a way back? Can we bring those people back in, and will that help to build up the system? Yeah. How do we do it?
Well, if I was at the service, I'd come back in if I thought it was a safe place to work, where I was valued and respected, and where I could do the job that I needed to do. So make it a safe space, make it somewhere where you feel respected, and where you know that that organisation is going to help you to do the job that you need to do. And that's what our Director of Children's Services and others want to happen at the moment. That's what they strive to do. But again, without the authority, the power to make things happen that will create that culture, that environment. Make it high status. And high status doesn't mean pay loads more money. Just make it somewhere where, if I'm a children and family social worker, I feel really valued. And this is about being able to spend time with your front line, if you're a Director of Children's Services, etc. And this is where it's really important in terms of your frontline managers, because they often create the experience of what it's like coming to work. Your frontline team manager, not your Director of Children's Services. So you want to actually have a cohort, and you have largely got it, but you don't give them the recognition they should have. I say they're paid at the same level as your more experienced practitioners. And actually have your frontline managers given the recognition that they should be given as well, to give the local leadership, the on-the-job, day-by-day leadership that they need to be able to give. They have two roles. One is they create what it's like in terms of that microclimate of coming to work. The second role is they actually quality assure practice, because they're close to it day by day. They are really important. Value them more than you do at the moment.
Thank you very much. So it's not a lost cause. You think that there is the people who were encouraged to work in this environment for years, studied and worked in it, can be enticed back, and there is the potential.
I've experience of achieving this, and returners programs. People who've left because they've had caring responsibilities, maybe young family, maybe older relatives or whatever, leave the service at that point in time. They need some help to come back, because they need to be updated. They need a bit of help in rebuilding their confidence. But if they know that this is somewhere where they're going to be valued, where they think this is something that, it gets respect, they'll want to come back in.
Absolutely, and the childcare piece that you're mentioning there as well, and that's something we hear time and time again in this room, and it comes from nurses and it comes from doctors, and certainly the doctors outside today were raising that as well. That there's a lack of affordable childcare for people working in the sector, and it does drive people away. So that's something we are very aware of. I wanted to pick up on some of the final comments from the report, particularly one that came from your expert review group.
Young people.
The young people who are your experts.
And just to say, that was organised for me independently by VoIPIC. Mm-hmm. You have a really impressive organisation there.
Absolutely.
What I like to see is you creating that type of opportunity for parents to be able to have a collective voice as well. It might not be one organisation. You have patches of this in Northern Ireland with parents being able to come together, but you don't have that across Northern Ireland. So in the same way that you have VoIPIC, really good organisation, really impressive workers, absolutely amazing young people. You could do something similar for parents as well. And I know there's a workshop going on in Derry, I think, soon, looking at possibly some developments around that. That's another recommendation from the report.
Clearly their voice has been very, very important in the report. It does concern me reading those final comments because of whether there will be a will to deliver on the panel's recommendations, citing previous experiences of involvement in consultations that did not bring about change. And I imagine that's incredibly frustrating for the people who were involved in that. I want to assure yourself and the young people and the organisations there is a will. Certainly this committee, Children's Services were the highest priority when we were looking at our strategic priorities, and certainly I know every member of the committee is absolutely committed to that. So it's something that we will be trying to keep a focus on, a regular focus for the duration of this committee as much as we can.
Danny, I'm struggling. I really am struggling. Because as I say, I found it very difficult to find out who pulls the levers in Northern Ireland to make things happen. And when I've asked other people about that, they've not been able to tell me either. And in the report, I have this continuum from, on one hand, freezing things as they are at the moment, nothing changes, to fudge. We play around the edges, we have lots of activity, but not much action, loads of working groups, etc. But the fundamental change that's necessary is not being tackled. And then what I call the fix option, which is, to be honest, for me, I can see no alternative to the ALB. But what I'm concerned about is how we actually, because when you leave this room, before you leave this room, you have another agenda item this afternoon. You had the doctors striking outside to go and speak with just now. There'll be loads of other issues that are taxing the minister, taxing good people in the Department of Health. How do you actually get something like this to be given the attention that it needs to be given when, in the big scheme of things, it is not the biggest issue? But it is a really important issue, and it's one that's able to be sorted. So how do you actually carve out the space for yourselves as members, not just of the Health Committee, but of the Assembly, back in your political parties as well, to make sure that this is something amongst all the noise and activity that's around. This is doable. We are going to do it. We're going to do it with some urgency. And we're going to make sure that the Minister knows that that's a message we want him to have, and we'll support him in taking the decisions that need to be taken. There's nothing here, I don't think, that's politically controversial, but it's just going to get lost in the wash again.
Absolutely.
In answer to your question, who pulls the levers, it is the Minister. And it is up to us as a committee to raise it as a strategic priority and to continue to support him in order to make those decisions. And the
picture, I don't know how your politics work in Northern Ireland. I honestly don't. And you have an executive, and the executive is made up of senior leaders from your political groups. To what extent can you get the executive fired up about this so that the minister isn't kind of stranded on as it is a he, on his own, but the executive is fired up on this as well, and that this is the message that now is to be given by the executive with the minister, that this is something that's doable and we're going to do it.
No, you're 100% right, and I think, I know Colin is online, I'm going to bring him in now. I think just what you've said there really concerns me in terms of we're very aware of the really pressing issues that we've been at the junior doctor strike today and all of those issues which are very important, hugely important as well. But we're actually talking about children and young people here, and the fact that their voices are potentially being drowned out is something that we should all be very concerned about, particularly at this stage when all the work has been done. As I said earlier, you've told us what we need to do, not just you, everybody on the ground, the children, the young people, the families, they've all told us we know what has to be done. It's up to us to make sure that's done. And I think it's important that we continue to push that as hard as we can, because regardless of what way we look at it, if we don't do it, we're dealing with much bigger problems further down the line.
And hospitals, schools, yeah, those are big issues. I couldn't come through with a recommendation to you about how you can sort all your hospitals out and all your schools out in the next 2 or 3 years. I can come through and have come through with a recommendation informed by colleagues behind me and others about how you can really create a different platform for children's social care. Mm-hmm. So you can do this. You can do this.
And it's interlinked with everything that you've said. It's interlinked with housing, health, education, all of those elements of our lives. It's part of all of that. So it's not, I think, it's obviously the remit is health. But if we really want to deliver on all of that, we have to bring everybody together, and that's why it has to be an executive effort as well. So, but we'll certainly be doing all we can. Sorry, Colin, I know you're waiting to come in there online.
Thanks very much, Chair. I'm sorry, I'm zooming in from home today and was sitting in my conservatory and we had a hailstorm there, so I couldn't hear anything, so I've relocated. But yeah, look, Ray, once again, it's lovely to meet you. It's lovely to hear from you. And again, in sharing that frustration, this is the, whatever amount of times that we've met and we're hearing about the report and we're hearing about the review, we're hearing about the changes, but we're not actually seeing the action at the other end of that. And that is a particular MO of the Department of Health, to publish strategies and then not to pursue with them. But I think we should take some faith, and it is worth noting, we did turn 26 local councils here into 11. We did change 12 departments down to 9. We have reformed our policing services. So the executives here are capable of big change if they want to do it. And it is about getting that will, getting that drive from the executive parties to make sure that this is taken forward. And the fact that this will impact health, but it will also impact education, our Department of Education, our Department of Justice, our Department of Communities, that because there are other departments that are impacted, I do think that we need to escalate this to more of an executive level decision and buy-in, rather than simply landing it at the door of one minister and expecting him to do all of the cross-departmental work that's involved in there. So I think there is maybe an opportunity for us to try and see if this can be bumped up to executive level, and also at the backdrop that if it wants to, that change can take place. But I was wondering if maybe I could just get you to revisit maybe for a minute or two about the sort of things that you see systemically that we don't have in our society that is actually impacting upon the lives of young people, because we're so immersed in our communities and in our political systems here that actually having somebody coming from outside saying you really should have X, Y, and Z in place before you ever even think about trying to change the structures or change the young people. And if you don't do that, and I'm thinking, like, for example, something like our lack of an anti-poverty strategy and the impact that that would have on young people. But are there other things that you've seen in other places that you think we should be trying to get in place first?
Well, you will know this better than me. I'm a learner in Northern Ireland, okay? So you will know about your communities more than I do. But there are some things that have shocked me. One of the things that shocked me is the threat and fear which is embedded still within some of your communities. We have a bit of that across the water in some of our big urban centres, but it's not as prevalent as I have experienced it in Northern Ireland. I give examples in the review report of where I have stumbled across, because I didn't go out looking for it, but it hit me in the face when I was out and about what is happening in some of your communities in terms of what were called paramilitaries but are organised criminals now, intimidating, coercing and threatening. I'm not used to that. Yeah, I'm used to some really frightening and threatening men, for example, exploiting young people and having to get a hold of them and make sure that they, with our colleagues in the police, are in court and then are taken out of action if they need to be taken out of action. But not with that so prevalent as a kind of community issue. So that's one of the things. I don't have an answer to that. I know there's lots of work going on it, but it is different from my experience. And it does lead to some of the generational workloads for children's social care. We have children in care because of threats that they've received, children in secure accommodation because of the threats that they've received. not because of themselves, but because of the threats that they've received, to protect them. That is different for me. I'm a novice. You will know what you're doing about it, and I've seen some impressive activity around it, and I know the police are onto it. So you're doing the best you can, and hopefully with progress being made. I'm sure there is progress being made. The poverty bit, you have escalating poverty in Northern Ireland. You could, I was saying earlier today in a conversation, if I was spending any money at all at the moment, which you apparently don't have, but yeah, get on and do some things, I'd be getting rid of your two-child benefit cap. Because you're deliberately at the moment, creating intense poverty for children in your communities by that two-child benefit cap. Get rid of that. That would be my priority. If you had some money at all, first thing do, spend it on that. But the bit about the ALB proposal is that this stands alone. If you actually had the dedicated time being given to thinking about what we've been thinking about for the last hour, with a board thinking about it, a chief executive thinking about it, empowered to do what they would do, building agendas with the police, with schools, with colleagues still back within the health service, you could actually move things forward. So the ALB for me isn't the answer, but it's the platform for having the answer. And that will allow you also to be closer to some of your communities sometimes, because people can give time to that, so they can go out. And I heard the commentary, and it's dead right. There's differential community needs in rural urban areas, different parts of the region, etc. If you had colleagues who had the time to be out there in the community more than they are at the moment, you can start having those conversations with those communities about how to meet those needs.
And maybe just a second question just now. My background is in youth work, and I know that during the process of the review of public administration here, there was a real protection to keep youth work within education, because it felt that that's where its home was. It felt that it was an education service rather than being, for example, within the councils, a community service. How did you find the conversations with youth work practitioners about moving into an arm's length body that would then move them away from education and into something else? Now, I know people don't like change, but was there anything at any depth or anything beyond that that you felt was there?
Colin, I met with a number of different groups of staff who aren't currently within children's social care. So I met with education welfare officers, I met with youth workers, but I also met with public health nurses, health visitors and school nurses, probably more if I think about it, colleagues within youth justice, for example, and I had conversations with them about what did they think, what was their advice to me about what should happen. What I heard from youth workers who I met with, what I heard from education welfare officers who I met with, is that they saw their affinity as being pretty close to what happens within children's social care. And if there's a children's social care, children and family social care ALB, they would not be uncomfortable. Some of them would actually canvass for it to be located within that children's social care ALB. They feel, they tell me, a bit on the margins, marginalised at the moment, when within education the focus is really heavily on schools, and within youth justice it's within prisons, etc. And for the difference, though, I came up with in terms of my view about what would be in the ALB, so bring in youth work, bring in youth justice. We're primarily talking about working with young people. One difference is I did not make the same recommendation in relation to public health nurses, school nurses and health visitors, because what they said to me, feeding back what they said to me, is informing the recommendation. Our identity is primarily as health professionals. That's where we identify with. We do not want to be separated from other health professionals. That's where we think we should be located. We should work with children's social care, but not be placed within children's social care. So my recommendation in the report is within the ALB, bring in youth work. And youth work isn't just the statutory youth work services, it's the engagement with those working out in the community with young people as well through voluntary organisations. Give the lead responsibility for that to the Children and Families ALB. Bring in youth justice, including Woodlands, into the ALB, working primarily with young people. But for the public health nurses, health visitors and school nurses, I think you would have a major workforce crisis. It would not be attractive if they were taken outside of the NHS and put into a Children and Families ALB. It doesn't mean you don't work together. Actually, you give more attention to working together, but you don't locate them back in terms of employment within the ALB. That was the advice I was given, and I take that advice.
Ray, thanks very much. Pleasure as always to hear the passion about this issue, and I hope that we can try and encourage something to happen with it. But thank you, and thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Colin. Ray, this has been, I mean, it's been a really, really useful discussion, but it's so important for us to hear directly from yourself. I mean, we know the huge amount of work that has been done, but as we've said, I think everyone has said at this stage, we need to see the action now. And that's what we want to do and to push that forward. So, you know, any engagement we can have moving forward with yourself, whether it's remotely, we welcome that as well, but we'll hopefully see some action. We are, as I said earlier, we're due to get a briefing from the department now in the next 3 weeks from today. We are expecting the consultation response at that, and we'd be keen to see that.
Right, so you think that the consultation responses and the analysis of those responses will be available in 2 or 3 weeks' time?
We hope, I suppose we've asked. That's what we've asked for. Because that's key to, I think, us moving this forward. So that is what we said at our last briefing, that we wanted to see that. So we were told it was fairly imminent. So I hope that is, because we're also conscious that will be our last committee meeting before the summer recess. So, you know, we will keep a watchful eye on that. We continue to make sure that the department can move that at pace. So, look, thank you so much for your time. We really appreciate 3
final comments.
Absolutely.
Just really short, punchy comments, if I might. And one is, and they're really good people in the Department of Health, across the Health and Social Care Trust, in voluntary and community organisations. This is not about individuals. There are really impressive people in Northern Ireland, including in the Department of Health that you've had before you. But the structure is not right, the system is not right. You are misusing, disempowering, and not getting the benefit from the people that you have in Northern Ireland who are really good people. The second comment I'd make, if I might, is that there's a load of activity around. I don't just mean in health services and things like that. In children's social care, there's a load of activity, loads of working groups, etc. There's a load of activity, but not much action. And my view is that you want to drive the action rather than the activity at the moment. And this is not a criticism of individuals, it's the way you're set up. And the third bit is a challenge back to you individually, as MLAs. When you leave this meeting, what can you do, back with your political groups, back with your executive members, what can you do to make this an issue which isn't just the health committee today and you go on to something else and they come back again in 2 or 3 weeks' time? What is something that you can do personally to drive this forward? One of the recommendations in the review report we didn't discuss is a children's minister. And my recommendation for a children's minister is somebody who is worrying about this politically every day. There's no one worrying about this politically every day at the moment. Maybe that's something you can do. Thanks.
Thank you, Professor Jones. Really appreciate that. All the best.
Thanks for your time.
Thank you. Okay, members, coming out of that, is there anything we need to? I don't think so.
No, Chair, we'll follow up with the department on the written briefing.
No problem. Look, members, now that we have quorum, I'm going to revert back to some of our earlier items. You're okay. Sure, there's enough on you. It's 3:09. So if we can just take you back to item number 2 on your agenda, it's the chairperson's business. It's just two things I wanted to raise. Obviously, some of us were in attendance today at the junior doctors' strike, which unfortunately had to go ahead due to a lack of progress on the issue. I suppose just to reiterate our support in terms of that, and hope that we can find and can see a solution fairly quickly. I feel that there has been a wee bit of drift in terms of that. So we have been speaking to some of the junior doctors at the front of Stormont today. It's a huge issue, and really hope that we can see a resolution to it in the very immediate future. And the other item I just wanted to mention was this morning I attended, and the Health Minister was also in attendance of the Community Development and Health Network event in the Long Gallery, and it was they were launching their report around building community partnerships with community pharmacy. It was absolutely excellent, and I would encourage members to get a wee look at that. It feeds in really well to some of the briefings we've had, particularly around community pharmacy and the really important role they have to play in our communities and in delivering services, and also in tackling health inequalities and the importance of community development and that. So it's just to point that out to members. Item number 3 then is the draft minutes of the meeting held on the 30th of May. It's at page 6 of your meeting pack. Are members content with the minutes as drafted? Yeah. Item number 4 then is is under matters arising. Just if I can refer members to your table papers, page 3, we received the new domestic and sexual abuse strategy for 2024 to 2031, as we are waiting some further information on some of the issues following last week's briefing, and we had asked for that strategy to be provided as soon as possible. Are members content to note the strategy today and just await the further information that we had requested? I also want to point out the ministerial correspondence on the Victims and Prisoners Act and the Effective Blood Compensation Scheme, which is in table papers at page 102. Are members content then that the letter is published on the committee's LCM web pages alongside the papers considered at last week's briefing? Okay, thank you, members. We will now move to item number 6, and this is our departmental briefing on the June monitoring round. If we could refer you to the briefing paper and the spreadsheet in your table papers from page 106, and papers in tab 6 of the main pack from page 358. You're all very welcome back. You get permanent residency here very soon. Just to welcome Bridget Worth, the Director of Finance, David Keenan, Head of Financial Planning, Danielle Mallon, Head of Financial Management, Linda Carter, Head of Capital Resources Unit, and Brian Dunlop, Deputy Principal of Capital Resources. Members, we have about an hour for this session, and the briefing will be covered by Hansard. If I could invite officials to make their opening remarks for about 5 minutes.
Okay, thank you, Chair. And as usual, I'll start by making some opening remarks on the resource position, and then I'll hand over to Linda, and she'll cover capital. Okay, so the paper you have in front of you sets out the department's bids for June monitoring. As you'll be aware from the budget assessment that the former minister sent you recently, the trusts are currently projecting a £189 million deficit following the delivery of those savings that they've assessed as low and medium impact. That assessment gave you a high-level summary of the sorts of things the trusts have put forward as the only way they have of managing this pressure in the short space of time we have available this financial year. Work is continuing to review these proposals and to ensure that they're calibrated appropriately, in particular so that there's a sense that the definition of what's low, medium or high impact is broadly the same across all of the trusts. Once that work's complete, it's expected that further information will be able to be shared around the likely impact by trust of both the measures that will be implemented and those higher level impact measures that the Minister has indicated will not be implemented. The first bid, therefore, is for £189 million to bridge this gap and to make those reductions unnecessary. In addition to that, in order to fully avoid higher impact measures, the department also needs to receive the £75 million that was assumed in our financial planning would be received in monitoring during the year. That assumption was made in order to avoid over-exaggerating the likely impact of the opening budget, in recognition that the department does normally receive funding during the year. Okay, so the third bid is for additional training places. In order to successfully continue the rollout of multidisciplinary teams in primary care, we need to ensure that sufficient staff are appropriately trained, and this bid will enable us to secure those places in advance of the outcome of the allocation of transformation funding. A bid has also been submitted to secure funding to enable a pay offer of 3% to be made to our staff in 24-25. Whilst we await the recommendations of the pay review bodies prior to considering an offer, securing the funding would enable us to move at pace when those recommendations are made. Having said that, I'm well aware that our bids are in excess of the funding that's likely to be available, and hence that we are unlikely to be successful in securing all of the funding we'd like to receive. Nevertheless, I think it's important that we continue to present the full extent of what's required to continue to run the service in its current form in 24-25. Finally, we've submitted a bid for depreciation and impairment that would bring our budget position back to where it was at the end of 23-24. Whilst this is often regarded as a technical accounting matter, this funding is required to support new capital investment, and if it cannot be secured, has to be covered from the funding we have for other services. So I'll hand over to Linda now to give you an overview of the capital position.
Okay, thanks, Bridget. As set out in your briefing paper that we provided to you, we did have slippage of 48.1 million in the Mother and Children's flagship project. Now, that was as a result of the profiles that we had in February have changed since the profiles we got most recently in May. And because it's a flagship project and it's ring-fenced, we have no option. We are obliged to return that to DOF. However, as set out in your briefing paper, we have submitted 4 bids to DOF. The first one is 50 million for additional backlog maintenance. Given that the pressure across the health estate is currently 1.4 billion, with 249 million of this deemed as high risk. We do allocate £25 million per year for the backlog maintenance, but you know, if we just maintain that annual allocation, it's going to take about 10 years to address that, and the high risk is just going to grow. So that was the reason for that bid. The second bid is for general capital, and funding in this category, while it's not fully contractually committed, it's required each year to provide regular ongoing investment to the Health Service and the Northern Ireland Fire and Rescue Service. I think one thing that should be noted is the cost to maintain and upgrade a hospital is much higher than any other public sector building, mainly because of everything that's behind the walls, the life-saving equipment, the medical gases, the ventilation systems and things like that. As a result, the department has to direct a significant portion of our annual budget to this category. Regular and ongoing investment is also required, particularly to purchase ambulances, fire engines, equipment for the Northern Ireland Ambulance and Northern Ireland Fire and Rescue Service, for the replacement of medical equipment, including MRIs and CT scanners, for the replacement of flu stocks, for research and development, and to provide investment in GP practices across Northern Ireland for the GP Improvement Scheme. Our next bid is for leases. Because of the change in the accounting treatment of IFRS 16, leases are now capitalised, and there is a large lease that's required this year for cellular pathology. We don't have the funding for that, so that's why I've submitted that bid, the 0.2 million, to try and address the gap that we have. And then finally, we have a bid for cyber security licences and for the purchase of iPads and phones for domiciliary care staff across the trust to maintain or to manage care packages. In this monitoring round, we'll be receiving funding from the Department of Economy and for the Small Business Research Initiative and the Invest to Save Energy Scheme, which trusts can apply for, and there's about 15 million available coming through in January or in June monitoring, and then also from the Department of Education for Sure Start leases. And that's all I have to say. So Bridget, David, Danielle, Brad and I are happy to take any questions.
Thank you all, and we do appreciate your time, because we know you've been back to committee a few times at this stage, and I don't underestimate the challenge that you all have in terms of trying to balance the books on a lot of this. I know it's difficult enough for me to get my head around at times, and it's a moving picture. I suppose just to go back to the point of the bid, then the overall bid for over 498 million in total.
Yes, I think so. Is it? Probably.
Yeah. No, look.
Yes, including depreciation. Yes.
So yes. Obviously, as you've pointed out, Bridget, the expected amount in June monitoring is well below what has been bid for. So I suppose I just wanted to get some understanding then about what plans then are in place to identify the kind of critical needs there. So for what is received. Terms, I suppose it's really essentially where's the prioritisation then of whatever money is received, because obviously everything's important, but we do have to have a plan in place then of how that will be.
So in terms of the 189 million, effectively
trusts.
Yes, for trusts. I mean, the bids, I suppose, with the exception of the depreciation impairment bid, which comes out of a different pot, and I will hand over to Linda to talk about prioritisation of capital bids. But in terms of the other 4 resource bids, they are listed in our order of priority, and I suppose that's where we're looking to anything that we get against the 189 million will mitigate those higher impact savings that the trust would otherwise have to make. So because, as you say, we haven't got a fully documented plan as to exactly what we would need to cut to balance that 189 million, we will, but you know, anything that we get in June monitoring to offset against that will obviously go to first towards those things that we deem the highest impact. So, you know, the Minister's been referring to high and catastrophic impacts. So, I mean, we will have some things in there that are just, in inverted commas, high impact.
Yeah.
So the funding would first go towards those things that are deemed into the catastrophic category. But as I say, I do recognise we're not at the point where we've got a granular level of detail of that as yet, but that's broadly the principle that we would use.
Okay. Do you know when we would expect to see that?
So I'm expecting that something within the next month. That, I mean, there obviously is considerable work ongoing to get to the point where that can be provided, but we are expecting that at the end of that process that each trust will be able to produce a summary of what they're intending to deliver in terms of those low and medium impacts, as well as what would need to be delivered in terms of the high and catastrophic at that point.
Okay. And do you foresee then that if that 189 million were received, that would actually be a huge alleviation then of the potential impacts again that will impact patients and service users?
Absolutely. So, I mean, if it's slightly more complicated because of this 75 million financial assumption that we made that we would receive 75 million in year. So we would need to get 264 million to be able to say actually all of the high impacts can be alleviated. But if we got the 189 million, I think as a department we would then need to think about whether we thought we might get another 75 in the October and January monitoring rounds. If we thought that might be likely, we might then be able to say, okay, we can cease those plans entirely. If we're concerned that maybe that kind of level of money wouldn't be available later in the year, we may still need to look to implement 75 million of that 189, simply because that funding gap is still there. So I think we'd have to make an assessment of how much more we thought might be likely to come in the future, if that makes sense.
That actually leads into my next question then around the October monitoring round. And I know we're probably speaking hypothetically, but it's not that far away. And potentially with what may be received in this June monitoring round, it gives you the ability to plan of what the next bid will be. And you're saying there, Bridget, then that if that was received in its entirety, so the overall, the 264, so the 189 plus another 75, we actually could see a situation where maybe we don't need to implement any of those really high impact cuts. That'd be fair to say.
Yes, although we should bear in mind that still leaves us without any funding for a pay rise in year. But it would. I mean, I think sort of my sense of the position is you would not implement those high and catastrophic cuts necessarily in order to fund a pay rise, but obviously that would be a matter for the Minister.
Okay, so I'm not looking you to answer this question. If you want to, you can, but my reading of this is that we have been presented with the outgoing Minister with a very bleak, probably quite frightening picture, but actually there is a potential here that some of this can be avoided given the in-year monitoring rounds if the monies are received.
So yes, that I would concur with that position, but you have to remember, I don't think any of us expected as much to be available in June monitoring as is available. It's a lot of money that's available in this June monitoring round compared to what's normally available in my experience. So I mean that's obviously been helped a little bit by the financial framework I can never remember the name of it, but the deal that's been done, I suppose, that enables us to get that extra 24%. That has meant that pot, I think, in June monitoring is much bigger than we could ever have anticipated.
I think it's fair to say, and again, it's not for yourself, but I suppose for members to maybe think about is that this time last week, potentially, we just got the budget assessment from the Minister, I think it was. When we would have known at that stage potentially what was coming down the tracks. So,
but I suppose as well that's why we did assume that 75 million received in year based on past experience that was a reasonable assumption of what might come in year. So that's why we sort of said, right, well, let's make that assumption up front so that the impacts that we're sharing are not 264 million, they are only 189 million. So we tried to do that, but as I say, and I mean we still don't know whether the department's going to get more than 75 million this monitoring round.
Everything is caveated. I completely understand that. But what I said very clearly to the Minister when he wrote a letter to the Health Committee when we talked about it in the Chamber was that for anybody outside of this assembly listening to that, it was presented in such a way that this was happening, which isn't the case, because we have to see what's happening, and there's potential here that this could be avoided if the monies are available. And we said that, we cautioned that at every stage. So what we've heard today, I think, gives us a wee bit of hope in that things can change, and in a very short time, because we're talking about June monitor now. I mean, we're almost halfway through June at this stage. You know, the time is moving fairly quickly, and we're preparing then for the next 2 monitoring rounds. And I think there's definitely hope there, and I think that's what we need to be getting the message out, because certainly my experience speaking to people on the ground is that people feel that there is no health service given the messaging that has surrounded that. So for me, I know I'm not saying we're in a panacea, everything's solved, absolutely not. But I do think that there is some things that will hopefully be offset. So it was just good to get that clarity around it. Just one other question. I suppose you talked about the depreciation and impairment. Are you able to give us a wee bit of a breakdown of some of the most critical depreciation and impairment needs in relation to the ALBs? You mentioned, I know that it's the 26 million is the bid around that.
So as I mentioned, that's bringing us back up to the level of depreciation that we would have had spent in 23-24. And that need had increased in that year, largely because there's been quite a few capital investments come online during 23-24, Encompass being the most significant. And obviously once that asset then comes into use, you start needing to charge the depreciation. So it's a symptom of those assets coming into use during 23-24. We will have to revisit the estimate in year to see if there is more required, if you see what I mean, once we see what the likely profile is of capital assets coming into use during 24-25 as well. Okay, no, thank you for that. Danny?
Thank you, Chair. I struggled to get my head around the numbers, to be honest, and I went round them a couple of times, and just with the lack of detail, without actually seeing what things cost and where we are, what was being spent where, I do find it very hard to understand. Particularly, that has helped me today. Certainly, but as I understand it, your second priority is the 75 million bid that you already assumed you were going to get.
That's correct. And I suppose there's a little bit of false numbering between number 1 and number 2 in a way, because to a certain extent, it doesn't really matter which way round those ones come, because they all are going towards plugging that deficit. But actually, we felt it was easier to understand if we presented it as 2 separate bids, one for the 189 and one for the 75, because if we'd given you one bid of 264, you'd be sort of going, well, the budget assessment says 189, the bid says 264, which is it? Yeah. And hopefully this way you can sort of see it is the 189 that we have said to trusts, you have to manage with this amount, and that's how much they've said is a shortfall. But in telling them how much they got, we'd assumed an additional 75 already.
I do find it hard to get my head around the numbers at times. What I would like to see, in future, just for clarity, is a bit more sort of information about the numbers. But thank you, that has helped today. And
certainly, if it would be helpful to engage offline on what sort of thing would be useful, I'm more than happy to do that.
That would be great. Yeah. But I think other members of the committee probably feel the same as well. But certainly, I know the trusts are coming towards us with detailed plans as well. So we look forward to them, and hopefully that will start to shed a bit of light on us for us.
Because what that should do is give you more granular detail of what's under that 189.
And that's something I know we've heard again and again requested from around this table. We want to understand. We want to know what things are cost. We want to know how much money is there, and what can be delivered. It is. I've heard a bit of hope here today as well. So that is good, because of the despair and the gloominess that we have heard previously. So it is good to hear that there is hope that things can be mitigated, and that is encouraging. I have a couple of questions just based on that. One thing I'm very aware of is the agency spend, and the reduction in agency spend is absolutely key to us progressing here. Can you tell me a bit more about what you're doing to further reduce our reliance on agency at the minute?
So the agency work that's already underway on nursing agency, that will continue, and because that new arrangement only came into effect midway through last year, we would expect there to be naturally, a 12-month impact of that, whereas there was maybe only 7 or 8 months impact in 23-24 of that nursing agency reduction. Okay. Similarly on the social work agency reduction. But the key for us this year is to try to do something similar around medical locums. Because that's sort of the next biggest area of spend really for us to target, and to look at how we can, taking the principles we use for nursing agency, get more of the locum spend onto on-contract arrangements. And, that's a very strong, very significant part of the low and medium impact savings that the trusts have put forward in arriving at the 189 million.
No problem. So with the nursing in particular, it was the off-book agencies that you have effectively cancelled at this point?
The vast majority of the off-contract, yes, has now ceased.
Okay, and are you doing anything on the other side when you're talking about reliance on agency, as in building up bank around trust banks?
Yes, so that what you actually see is that although our spending on agency workers has come down, you will see an increase on the other side in spending on both permanent staff and on bank and things like that, because you're not, you still need the member of staff, but what you're doing is getting them at a more cost-effective way, but also you're getting a permanent member of staff who's more familiar in working in the particular location with a team, sort of more solid team around them. So there are advantages operationally, I understand, to having permanent members of staff rather than agency workers as well. So it's one of those things where it's cheaper, but it's also better, which is what we all really like to see.
I may have to declare an interest here, Chair, as a bank nurse. So what incentives are you offering to encourage people over from agencies to bank?
So now you're starting to get, I'm not directly involved in that project work, so I wouldn't be in a position to give you that detail today, but certainly I'm sure colleagues could provide it if you would like to.
Very encouraging to hear that that work is ongoing, and certainly that's key to making those savings going forward. So thank you. A couple of issues that were raised as well. There's a few things that were suggested that may happen. They may not now happen now, which obviously is reassuring. There were drugs and therapies that were approved in a GB that may be restricted here. There was support services that could be reduced here, and there was vaccination programmes that could be suspended here as a result of cost savings. Can you outline what they may be? What vaccination programmes were you talking about?
I suppose there are ongoing. Those are options. So we're not saying that all of those things would definitely happen, but I suppose the minister would have in front of him the £189 million worth of options from trusts. Those sorts of things that you've described there are the only other options that we really have available to us instead of that 189 million. So, as I say, it would be potentially things like delaying the introduction of a new drug from GB into Northern Ireland now. I mean, by definition, they're new drugs, so it's hard. There'd be forecast of what that might be based on past experience, but we wouldn't really have a list of what they could be. In terms of vaccination programmes, I mean, it would be things like whether you decide to restrict the seasonal flu vaccination to a smaller cohort. Now, look, I'm not saying that any of these things will happen. They are options. I mean, we have the option to do more or less on all of our ongoing vaccination programmes in order to reduce the costs and to enable us to not do some of the higher and catastrophic impact things in the trust. But as I say, I am absolutely not suggesting that those things are going to happen. They are options that are available for the minister to consider. It's for him to decide whether he thinks that's something that should or should not be done.
And as I said, hopefully reassured today that these things might not happen, but very concerning to read that particularly vaccination programmes might be affected.
And as I say, it would only, I suppose, first of all, I know the minister's indicated he may not go ahead with some of these things anyway, but So it's in the interest of saying there's this 189 million of potential reductions from trusts. What are the other options? You know, a full assessment of what all those options are, despite the fact that we know that a lot of them are counter strategic. I mean, the reason that we do vaccination programs is because we know that they're proven to keep people out of hospital. So, you know, actually you could be saving money here and costing more over there, but it's, I suppose it's an illustration of how few options we have in the short term, that those things are even on the table at all. But they're comparable when you're talking about potentially reducing the number of acute beds or the number of domiciliary care hours. You know, ceasing a vaccination program is you know, a comparable level of something you really wouldn't want to do, if that makes sense.
No problem. Thank you very much for that.
Just before I bring you in, there was just two very quick things I'd missed, but one of them comes on the back of what Danny said, and it is around that suggestion that domiciliary care hours or acute beds could be cut. And obviously that is something that would concern everyone, because for me that's even a greater cost if that were to be implemented, because the pressures then it would add to in our hospitals and all of that. So I suppose when we're talking around those high impact costs, I'm assuming that's what's considered as part of that, those kind of proposals.
Yes, but as I say, that's where, you know, as I know that the Minister has said that he does not intend to take those decisions to do those things, but it is incumbent on us to present the Minister with the options that are available to us, and those are the options that are available. But then absolutely, as I say, I know he in his speech earlier this week indicated that there were certainly options he would not be prepared to take.
What is the implication, or what, not the implication, what is the consequence if he decides not to take those actions but the money's not received?
So the accounting officer of the department would ask the Minister for a ministerial direction, because obviously that would be going against his duties as accounting officer to balance the budget. So what happens after that is those directions require approval by the Department of Finance, who I suspect in this climate would probably need to take that to the executive for a decision. Now, I mean, I don't know obviously what the outcome of that would be, but I suppose the upshot of it is, you know, the accounting officer can't go against the policy direction of the Minister, even if the ministerial direction isn't approved. So ultimately he just needs to, in fact, all the accounting officers across the system would need to satisfy themselves that they had done everything they can to get as close to break even as possible. But then there are consequences, obviously, if that means a breach in the budget for the block as a whole, in terms of potentially the financial package and funding being deducted from future years' budgets. So I don't imagine it's a decision the Minister's going to take lightly.
So I suppose what you're saying is then, because of the previous agreements with the Tory government, that as part of that financial package, that actually if that's breached, that could cause implications.
Could have significant implications for the next financial year, and as I say, I'm sure the Minister will be taking that into consideration when he looks at the options when we get to the point where we're presenting them to him.
Okay, thank you for that, Bridget. Sorry, Nuala.
Thank you, Chair. You asked a question I was going to
sorry.
ask. No, that's okay. Because we have officials up every week answering questions, and I recognise that a lot of this is political and also policy direction. When it comes to the finance team, it's difficult for you, so I recognise that. It's also difficult for the trusts as well. And you ask the trusts that here's 180 million, right? Give us your options for your savings, and they're obligated to do that, to provide the options. And those are the options that are being put out into the public as this is what could be cut, X, Y, and Z. And then you have the kind of not nice job of presenting that to the Minister, and that is unfortunate. In order to make those savings, it has to be done. Look, we're part of the executive in voting for the budget because we were where we are. We argued for the better package in coming years, and we've been working as a team, I would say, to even push that forward since the executive was back up and running. But to hear today that if the UUP Health Minister decides not to actually show what priorities are and lead in what all other ministers are doing in very difficult circumstances, because they are left with no other option for the time being. And I must emphasise that, for the time being, because there are monitor rounds. There, as I would hopefully like to see a change of government, and seems to head in that way. Will be a spending review, etc., and hopefully soon multi-year budgets. But just to hear that that a minister might do that and have a consequence on future budgets is really disarming. So I guess I don't really have a question because it's answered. It just, at this point, does raise the question, is what's the point of the UUP in an executive if they're going to derail it in its entirety for the future of all departments, not just health. And I understand the importance of the health budget and the difficult circumstances that the officials have been put into.
Danny, do you want to come in? And then, because I had another question, but it's separate to that.
It's just one quick question. It's something we've raised here before, and certainly we asked the previous health minister just about the transformation fund that the Minister of Finance had outlined, £47 million per year. And we'd asked the minister, and he'd give us some answer about increasing training places. Have you any specific bids ready for that fund?
So we've been asked to provide bids by a week tomorrow. So those bids are under preparation at the moment, and obviously we need to agree what those priorities are with the minister before I would be in a position to comment on that.
Okay, but there is preparation done.
Oh, absolutely. You can rest assured we will be trying to make sure that we secure funding from wherever we can. I mean, and I think, Linda mentioned our trusts have done a very good job at securing investor save capital from the Department for the Economy. Is it the Energy Fund?
The Energy Fund.
So
can we get sight of those bids after they're made? Is that possible?
Yes, the transformation bids. Mm-hmm. Yes, I mean, I don't anticipate. I mean, obviously the minister would have to approve that, but I would expect that would be possible.
Orlia?
Yes, thank you, Linda. Just on the capital, so see the 15 million for backlog maintenance. Mm-hmm. So you were saying that's sitting at 1.4 billion overall, but the 249 was deemed as high risk. Mm-hmm. So hopefully if you get the 15 million obviously to offset some of that, but when you say high risk, that's obviously leaving still a huge amount of, how can you explain the high risk part for me? Does that mean that parts of the hospital, health and social care estates are dangerous?
It just, well, as I say, I'm not sorry, I got this from our property management branch, and I could probably give you more detail from them, but yes, there are estate surveys that are carried out, and so say the whole estate is worth 3 billion. 1.4 billion of it is there is a backlog maintenance, and that 249 million is high risk, and all we can afford is to give 25 million a year, and it has come down. It was a lot higher, so it has continued to come down over the past few years. Mm-hmm. But yes, there are some elements that are high risk.
Yeah, maybe just even if in writing, if we could get just a breakdown of actually, what the high risk actually means, because it's obviously worrying, it's a huge amount of money that you would need, obviously, to resolve all of that, but 15 million isn't much, in terms...
No, that would give us 40 million this year, but yeah, it's not a lot.
So I'm just wondering in terms of how, does that mean that there's potentially dangerous parts of our health and social care estate that can't be fixed up?
No, I think it's just, as I say, there is the State of the State report that was published. I think the last one was in 22-23, and so the detail will be in it. The one for 23-24 hasn't been published as yet.
Okay.
But although they are the figures from it, but yes, I can get you more information if you want.
And see then on the cyber security licences. So the 9.1 million. And it says it's for a number of ICT schemes, including the renewal of the cyber security.
Yeah.
So, you know, like, what cost is the cybersecurity? It sounds like a lot of money, but obviously I've no idea. Obviously these things are extremely expensive. So how much of that 9.1 million is on cyber security? And I'm assuming you're getting like the sort of best price for those things, you know.
For licences for this year, they run out in March 2025, so it's 7.8 million. But that's not the whole cost of the cybersecurity. The full cost of cybersecurity project is 36.6 million over about 5 or 6 years.
Okay.
But that's the cost of it this year.
And do we use the same sort of programmes or models from Britain or the South, or how do we?
I'm not sure I can get you more
Just
detail
sounds like
on
a
that.
lot of
That would be
money,
our IT, but I can get more detail on that. Yeah, it is a lot of money, but you know, there's been some recent cybersecurity attacks in London, and there was a massive one in the south as well. I think that cost them about £100 million to fix that.
Yes,
so
yes, it's
something that we can't not do.
Yes, no, of course. Thank you. I just wanted to ask about that.
Okay, there's just one more question I want, and I probably should have asked this first, given the briefing that we had prior to yourselves coming in. My understanding in terms of the Children's Social Care Review is that at present, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, there's no funding attached to that. Is that something that's factored into the budget now going forward, or that you know of?
So, I mean, again, it's down to the fact that really we're looking to plug the gap that we have before we're looking to fund new investment. So until we're in a position where we can fully fund our current activity, you know, we need to consider that first. So, you know, at the moment it's hard to see how we could invest anything more in 24-25.
So
I mean, that's not to say, I'm sure that with any report there are recommendations that can be progressed you know, with existing staff at low cost, so that you're ready then for when hopefully at some point in the future we have the capacity to invest.
Do we, I mean, and maybe you can't answer this today, so I'm conscious that it's I'm coming at you cold with this, but I suppose, is there any prioritisation in terms of that? So if and when money does come available, that would be on a priority list, because it's part of transformation is essentially what I'm saying, and that's why I think it should be up there.
So we wouldn't have that, you know, we have a significant list, I suppose, of things we would like to do if funding becomes available, and certainly it will be on that list. We don't have it particularly in priority order, and you'll appreciate that with the new minister only in, you know, what his priority order might be different from the former minister. So, you know, but if and when money did become available, and part of engaging with him on what he believes are the priority bids for the transformation fund is around getting a sense of what he thinks we should be putting forward first. And just because we're putting something forward first doesn't mean that we think other things are unimportant. You know, but inevitably we're going to have to focus on some aspects to make sure that we target, you know, scarce resources into achieving something in an area, rather than spreading it so thinly that it doesn't make as much of a difference in any area.
No, absolutely, I understand. I suppose it's really just to kind of get an understanding from our perspective based on what we've just heard of where that's sitting. So it's good to have it. Listen, no one else has indicated at this point, to be glad to know. But thank you all for coming today. We do really appreciate your time, and hopefully as more information comes available, we'll be able to get a good look at what's going on, and hopefully we'll be in a better position fairly soon. Have to be optimistic. Thank you. Okay, members, we move on to item number 7. Is there anything coming out of that we need to action, or I think we
need to keep a close eye on what happens next, really.
Do we know when the June monitoring rounds conclude, or?
As far as I'm aware, Chair, it'll be towards the end of the month.
Okay.
The department did say that they would provide a number of follow-ups, so we'll get that captured and requested.
Yeah.
Sorry, Chair, is it worth asking the Minister about his plans for the Transformation Fund?
Yeah, absolutely. That was one of my questions, and I forgot to ask it. Leave it in there. So yes, Olia.
And sorry if I missed it, because I think we went right into that briefing directly after the Ray Jones as well. So if we're writing to the Minister, I think we need to reference some of the things we discussed with Ray directly, particularly like, you know, the urgency in terms of practical next steps. When will the consultation be published?
Well, that's what I'm saying, we're expecting it at our next briefing.
The 27th, did you? Yeah.
So we'll maybe get a follow-up.
We've a written briefing on that date on the Children's Services. At the last briefing we had with the department, they advised that the consultation, the analysis of responses was at the very end. So it is of what they were doing. So I would imagine any update we get will provide information on the analysis of the consultation and next steps.
Yeah,
so hopefully
but I think we should still ask the question to the Minister following Ray Jones's presentation today, to say, like, not only when will the consultation be published, obviously if we're getting the briefing on the 27th, but you know, what urgency is the Minister you know, placing on this matter, and
the implementation
what is the next steps, you know, so just given the urgency that Ray put on it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think that is that's very important. Okay. Item number 7 then is correspondence. If we can refer members to the correspondence list at page 390 of your pack, and the correspondence is from page 391. Are members content with the suggested actions at tab 7.1? Or is there anything anyone wants to raise? I suppose just to mention as well, in our table of papers, we received a ministerial response in regards to Muckamore Abbey. Our members will be aware of the ministerial statement that was published yesterday. Are we happy to note in relation to that?
I am, Chair. Just wanted to raise, I know that there's various pieces of correspondence, but just in terms of our forward work programme with the correspondence, that the issue of, like, for example, the deceased patients review is, you know, kind of all this correspondence is collated into our priority framework, particular for the reviews, so that we can ensure that those people who have requested to come to the committee, that we can find a slot for people, because you know, the Minister still hasn't, or the Minister never met with the families, and we know that Minister's time's busy and stuff, but we have to ensure that people get, you know, their voices heard.
Oh, absolutely, and I think we've been trying, I suppose, even outside of committee time, to meet with as many people as possible. We also have our KIA in 2 weeks' time, and I think a lot of that will be what we will want to raise. I know there's quite a number of different people will be affected, so ties in with our priorities as well around accountability and learning from you know, incidents and things like that. So I think, yes, you're absolutely right. That we do need to do that. So are members then content to note that statement? Okay. Item number 8 then is the forward work programme, and there's a couple of things under that I just want to raise. So it's at pages 441 and 442 of your pack. Members will have received an email informing them of the committee's informal meeting with NIPSA next Thursday the 13th at 12 noon in room 106. Just if members could advise the office of their availability to attend if they haven't already done so. That's obviously in relation to the Children's Social Work Services and the issues which we touched on in the debate, in the discussion with Professor Jones. And then the committee will be a usual time of 2 o'clock after that. On the 17th of June, Monday the 17th of June, we have the Oireachtas Health Committee coming to Belfast, and we have a visit scheduled to the Queen's Centre for Cancer Research at 10:30 a.m. on that day. That will be followed by lunch and a meeting here in Parliament Buildings at 1:15, and invites in relation to that will be issued tomorrow. So again, if we could just ask members to make sure that they indicate if they're available to attend. A lot of work has gone in to coordinate and organise this meeting, and it is something that we have talked about throughout the committee, so I would be really grateful if people can do that. And then we have a committee visit to the Fire and Rescue Service Learning and Development Centre in Cookstown, and that is on the morning of Thursday the 27th of June. And the committee meeting will then be in Parliament Buildings at 2 o'clock on the same day. So again, if we could advise of availability to attend that visit as well, which I think would be a really good one too. So are members content then to note the briefings as set out in the rest of the Forward Work programme?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Thank you. Has anyone any other business that they wish to raise at this stage? Okay, members, so the next committee meeting is on Thursday the 13th of June at 2 p.m. in room 29 here in Parliament Building. So thank you all. And
Committee Room 29. Sound. 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 Committee Room 29. Sound.